Can a test day be as revealing as a career victory? What really hid Leclerc behind his 144 laps in Hungary? You will be surprised to know that what happened that day could change the battle for the title in 2025. Hungaroring, a technical and narrow track, has always been one of the most demanding calendar, not only for pilots but also for engineers. In that environment of surgical precision and absolute concentration, Charles Leclerc came back to its SF25, not to run against the stopwatch as it does in a weekend of Grand Prix, but to become an instrument of development for the future. What seemed one more test in Pirelli's technical calendar was transformed, with the passing of the hours, into a direct window towards the heart of Ferrari and towards the personal character of the Monegasco pilot. In the middle of the summer break, with a calmer paddock and away from the usual media noise, Leclerc assumed a role that few value: the tester. During the day of August 6th, he dedicated each of his 144 laps not to look for pure speed, but to collect data, identify behavior patterns in the car and help mold the tires that the entire grille will use in 2026. He did it with a serenity that contrasted with the anxiety that left his last appearance in that same path just a few weeks before. That same car, the SF25, had been his executioner in the race when he led comfortably from the pole position, only to mechanically collapse around the lap 40. A structural failure in the chassis, one of the most critical pieces in the architecture of an F1 car, snatched not only a victory that seemed safe, but also the possibility of cutting key points in the fight for the championship. It was a hard blow. And yet, that same car was the one who piloted again without resentment, with a renewed approach and with his eyes beyond his own season. Leclerc's choice for this test was not accidental. Ferrari could have opted for any other pilot of his structure, but he needed someone with the technical sensitivity necessary to validate the tire behaviors, someone who knew how to distinguish between an aerodynamic difference and a balance caused by the rubber. They needed someone with experience, but above all, with commitment. And Leclerc has it. In addition, I was not testing any version of the car. Ferrari had implemented a series of structural and aerodynamic modifications designed to simulate the technical requirements expected of Regulation 2026. This included a different flat background, a redesign of lateral deflectors and a minimum height of slightly high chassis. Leclerc had to adapt to a car dynamic that was not only new, but artificially altered, and yet managed to deliver consistent data after return, demonstrating a level of concentration and adaptation capacity that reaffirms its strategic value within the team. In contrast, while other pilots such as Franco Colapinto suffered accidents and cuts in their technical programs, Leclerc completed his day without errors, with an almost clinical approach. His best time, 19,407, was anecdotal. The relevant thing was the consistency of its partials, the uniformity of its paths, the type of technical feedback that gave engineers and their disposition to work in unavailable conditions, with a car that was clearly not optimized for pure performance. In that technical silence of Hungaroring, without the cameras, without the clamor of the stands and without the urgency of Sunday, Charles Leclerc did something bigger than winning a race. He understood his role as an integral part of a major project. He returned to the same stage where the SF25 failed him, but instead of seeking revenge, he sought solutions. And in that gesture, in that silent and committed installment, it made it clear that it is not only one of the best pilots of the grid, but also one of the most valuable strategic assets that Ferrari has for the present and, above all, for the future. That abandonment was not just a sporty blow. It was a psychological earthquake. He came from an impeccable race in one of his favorite circuits, where he had perfectly executed each sector of the classification. 440 laps he dominated with intelligence, taking care of tires, keeping the persecutors at bay and executing each curve entry with surgical precision. And suddenly the car began to lose rigidity. The feedback changed. Trust evaporated back after performance collapsed completely. Seeing on his face the mixture of disbelief and frustration when getting off the car was more than eloquent. It wasn't just a lost career, it was a cruel message that even tactical perfection can be ruined by a structural failure. However, what really defines the champions is not what they do when everything works, but what they decide to do when everything breaks. And Leclerc chose to get up. And it was not only physical resistance. Leclerc also immersed himself in precision and muscle recovery work with cryotherapy sessions. Gym training focused on the lumbar and scapular zone, key areas for curve stability, and constant telemetry and simulator studies. The commitment was absolute. Each element of his training was designed to recover the balance lost in that abandonment in Hungary, not only at the technical but emotional level. What was being prepared was not just the body, it was the mentality with which it had to face the second half of the season. Charles arrived at the Pirelli test with another energy. Not as a defeated figure seeking redemption, but as a contender who had already forgiven the car, but had not forgotten. He returned to Hungaroring with the emotional control of someone who understood that losing a career is not the end, but part of the road. This mentality is not common. In Ferrari's recent history, few pilots have demonstrated the ability to convert a recent wound into concrete motivation. Leclerc, like the biggest ones, is achieving it. One who has decided that if the SF25 fails again, it will not be because he left something without doing. The car that led Charles Leclerc during the Pirelli test in Hungary was not a conventional SF25. Under that red body, a rolling laboratory was hidden. Ferrari had modified it thoroughly to simulate the aerodynamic and loading conditions provided for in the 2026 regulations, advanced more than a year to the behavior that the monoplays of the future will have. And this is no accident. It is a declaration of intentions. Because while many teams are busy turning off fires, Ferrari has chosen to turn on the torch of tomorrow. The SF25 that rolled with Leclerc included a completely redesigned rear suspension, a technical reinterpretation that was previously validated during a filming day in Mugello. This evolution seeks to attack one of the most persistent Achilles heels of the car: stability under traction. Before this update, Leclerc was forced to compromise the entire car settings to find a competitive operating window in classification. But that extreme adjustment generated a destructive collateral effect. The car became unpredictable in a long and extremely sensitive batch to tire temperature and pressure changes. In other words, it was a lottery. With the new package, that roulette began to stabilize. Leclerc's feedback was clear. The feeling of having to lead to the limit of lack of control has decreased. You can now attack with more confidence, enter curve with greater progressivity, and take better advantage of tensile and slow curve outings. But the most important thing is that this technical evolution is not limited to marginal improvements. It is a conceptual transformation of how Ferrari wants to design its cars in the post-effect era. Leclerc, with its aggressive style and its ability to identify microcambios and lateral balance, is the ideal figure to validate this address. During the tests in Hungary, different configurations of ride height, combinations of weight, rake angles, and variations in the stiffness of the rear axle were tested. Leclerc, with surgical patience, was delivering constant feedback to its engineers, completing long batches with minimal changes in car behavior, something unthinkable just 2 months ago. That allowed to map more precisely the critical areas of the dynamic behavior of the SF25 under simulated conditions of high load and low adhesion. The result is a database that will not only serve 2025, but will lay the precedent for the conceptual development of the 2026 car. This shade work is more important than it seems. Ferrari is not simply working to win a race. He is building the foundations of his next era. And he does it with Leclerc at the center of that process. Because beyond pure talent, Monegasco has become a strategic technical asset. His sensations, his demands, and his capacity for translation between what he feels behind the wheel and what is needed in the design of the car are now one of the pillars on which Maranello's technical philosophy is articulated. Therefore, what was seen in Hungary should not be interpreted as a simple tire test. It was a silent staging of Ferrari's new course. The SF25 is far from being a perfect car, but has ceased to be an indomitable car. It has gone from being a machine that Leclerc had to bend to a tool that begins to respond to its piloting. And if this trend is consolidated in the second half of the season, the rest of the grille must prepare for an even more dangerous Leclerc. Because if the car finally puts itself from its side, there will be no room for errors in rival teams. Ferrari is assembling his counterattack, and he is doing it from the rolling laboratory that few took the time to look carefully. Leclerc, unlike other pilots who are going through a stage of frustration or emotional wear, has found a way of transforming each setback into a source of impulse. His presence in Hungary was not that of a pilot fulfilling a contractual commitment, but that of a leader assuming the responsibility of pushing his team forward. This level of involvement, personal sacrifice, and technical approach is the one that separates the good from the essentials. And in Maranello they know it. That calm with which he executed his technical work in Hungaroring is misleading. Behind each of those 144 laps there is a storm contained. There is rage for what was lost in the Hungary GP. There is urgency for not letting more points escape in front of rivals such as Norris, Verstappen, or Russell. There is hunger for victory, not as a desire, but as a strategic need. And above all, there is preparation. Because if something left Leclerc in that test, it is not going to be presented to the second half of the championship waiting miracles. It will be presented with tools, with data, with a renewed mentality. This test, although it seems less in the official calendar of the FIA, is actually an act of silent construction. And as in every great storm, the previous calm always cheats. If Ferrari manages to capitalize on what Leclerc has started at this midpoint of the season, the next great awards could bring an unexpected narrative turn.